Havenwood Historical Museum was a hidden gem deep within the small town. During the day, it received curious visitors and students on excursions, but at night, it was immersed in a deep and mysterious silence. Emily, a young curator passionate about local history, spent most of her time at the museum taking care of the antiques and artifacts that told the city's story. One night, while working in her office, Emily realized that there was a lot of work to be done. She was engaged in cataloging a series of recently donated artifacts, including a collection of ancient manuscripts that promised to reveal long-buried secrets. With a resigned sigh, she decided that the only way to get the job done was to work late. The museum, at night, was a different sight. Dim light bulbs cast intriguing shadows over the dusty exhibits and ancient statues. Paintings of historical figures watched silently, and marble stairs seemed to lead to unknown places. Emily felt at home in that nocturnal solitude, as if the museum's living history was waiting to be discovered. As Emily walked through the halls with a flashlight in hand, she stopped and looked around, but the museum seemed empty and silent. Shaking off the uncomfortable feeling, she continued on her way to the main room, where a collection of antiques awaited. One of the pieces that intrigued her most was a wooden statue, known as the Guardian of Silence. The statue depicted a hooded figure with his hands crossed over his chest, his eyes closed in an expression of serenity. Emily has always considered it mysterious and unique among the museum's many works of art. As she approached the statue, Emily noticed that the wooden eyes seemed to follow her movements. She blinked and wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her. The statue's eyes, however, continued to follow her, as if they were watching every step she took. An uneasy feeling settled inside Emily, but she tried to ignore it and focus on her work. However, the statue's presence seemed more intense than ever. The wooden eyes watched her intently, as if they had a life of their own. Emily shook her head to herself and mumbled a nervous laugh. She was letting her imagination run wild in that silent and dark environment. However, she couldn't completely ignore the feeling that something strange was happening in the museum that night. With a sigh, Emily continued cataloging the antiques, trying to shake off the feeling of uneasiness that haunted her. The Guardian of Silence, with his disturbing eyes, remained motionless, but the feeling that the museum's past hid unfathomable secrets intrigued her more than ever. Emily continued her work in the main room of the museum, trying to focus on the tasks before her. However, the unsettling feeling that something was wrong persisted. The eyes of the Guardian of Silence statue were still watching her, following her as she moved around the room. As the night progressed, Emily began to hear strange sounds. At first, they were just hissing whispers, so soft she almost didn't notice them. She attributed these sounds to the wind passing through the cracks in the old windows or the old buildings settling in. However, the whispers began to become more audible and distinct. Emily frowned as she tried to make out the whispered words, but they were unintelligible, as if they were spoken in an ancient, forgotten language. The healer knew something was very wrong. She got up from her desk and began walking around the room, shining her flashlight into the space. Whispers seemed to echo from all sides, as if the museum walls were whispering dark secrets. Emily tried to shake off the feeling that she was being watched, but it was as if the very structure of the building was conspiring against her. Determined not to let her fear overwhelm her, she walked through the dark hallways, feeling an oppressive presence everywhere. As he went through the exhibits, he noticed that some of the figures depicted appeared to have eyes that followed their movements, just like the statue of the Guardian of Silence. Emily continued her investigation until she reached an area where Egyptian antiquities were on display. She approached an ancient burial urn carved with intricate hieroglyphics. However, as he looked at the urn, he noticed that the whispers had intensified and become clearer. She raised her flashlight to illuminate the urn and noticed something frightening. The face carved into the lid of the urn seemed to be moving, its lips moving slowly, emitting the whispers that tormented her. Emily took a step back, her heart beating wildly. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself, unable to believe what she was witnessing. She knew she needed to leave the museum and get help, but when she turned to the exit door, a terrible discovery left her petrified. The exit door was locked, preventing her from escaping. Panic set in Emily as she desperately tried to open the door. The whispers continued, now louder and clearer, as if dark voices surrounded her on all sides. Emily knew she was trapped inside the museum with an unknown and threatening presence. She had no choice but to face whatever was happening that terrible night. The museum, once silent and serene, now seemed to come to life as rising whispers echoed through the dark hallways. Emily was surrounded by a dark presence that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the building. She knew she needed to find a way out, but the door was firmly locked, as if it was being held by an invisible force. The whispers intensified, turning into distorted, inhuman voices. Emily could hear hissing murmurs that seemed to whisper her name, as if something within the museum knew her intimately. She backed away from the locked door, her eyes desperately searching for a solution. It was then that she remembered a story her grandfather used to tell her when she was a child. It was a local legend about the museum, a story about restless spirits seeking justice. Emily knew that the key to calming these spirits lay in an ancient amulet hidden in the museum's archives room. With renewed courage, Emily decided to face the dark presence that surrounded her. She knew that the only way to escape that terrifying night was to find the amulet and recite the prayer her grandfather used to mention. Emily made her way back through the dark hallways, the flashlight shaking in her hands. She could feel the weight of the past as she walked, as if the souls that inhabited the museum were watching her intently. Upon reaching the archives room, Emily began frantically searching for the locked drawer where the amulet was stored. The room was immersed in profound darkness, and the only light was the dim glow of his flashlight. Finally, Emily found the drawer she was looking for. She hesitated for a moment, thinking about what she was about to do. She knew there was no other option. With the key she found on her keychain, she was able to open the drawer and remove the old amulet. The amulet was a piece of metal decorated with ancient symbols. Emily held him tightly, feeling the energy emanating from it. She ran back to the main room of the museum, where the dark presence was waiting for her. With determination, Emily lifted the amulet and began to recite the prayer her grandfather used to say. The words were ancient and powerful, and she spoke them with conviction, begging the restless spirits to leave her alone. As Emily recited the prayer, the shadowy presence seemed to tremble and twitch. The whispers turned into harrowing screams, and the statue, the guardian of silence, emitted a terrible groan. It seemed as if the spirits haunting the museum were being repelled by the force of prayer. Finally, when Emily finished her prayer, the museum fell into silence. The dark presence disappeared, and the statue, the guardian of silence, returned to its inert position. The exit door, which was previously locked, was now unlocked. Emily left the museum with the amulet still in her shaking hands. She knew that the battle against the museum's dark past had been won that night. The restless spirits that had tormented her had been calmed. As Emily closed the museum door behind her, she knew that the story of that frightening night would never be forgotten. She had faced the supernatural and emerged victorious. The Havenwood Historical Museum, once steeped in mystery and darkness, was now calm and peaceful again. That night, filled with whispers in the shadows and shadowy presences, became part of the museum's history. But Emily knew that she too had become part of this story, a brave young healer who faced the unknown in search of the truth. Emily left the Havenwood Historical Museum with a sense of relief, but the night of terror still haunted her thoughts. She couldn't just ignore what had happened in that place. The feeling that something dark was hidden in the depths of the museum still lingered in his mind. The days that followed were filled with unanswered questions and a feeling of constant restlessness. Emily knew she needed to understand what had happened at the museum that night. She delved deep into the building's history and uncovered reports of strange and unexplained events over the years. There were stories of visitors who claimed to have heard whispers in the shadows and seen ghostly figures among the exhibits. Others talked about the Guardian of Silence statue, stating that its eyes seemed to follow people as they moved around the room. The museum had apparently been a place of supernatural encounters for decades. Emily decided she needed to delve even deeper into the museum's history and uncover the truth about the dark past that haunted it. She found old records, dusty newspapers, and testimonies from witnesses who had experienced paranormal encounters at the museum. As she gathered more information, a pattern began to emerge. The supernatural experiences were related to a specific period in the museum's history, the 1920s. During this period, the museum had undergone significant renovation, and many antiquities had been added to the collection. Emily focused her research on this decade and began unearthing information about the museum's history during that period. She discovered that a previous curator, Henry Thornton, had been responsible for acquiring the Egyptian antiquities and creating the statue the Guardian of Silence. As she read Henry Thornton's records, a dark story began to emerge. It seemed that he was obsessed with the search for mysterious and powerful antiquities, believing that they could grant knowledge and supernatural powers. He would have made a pact with unknown forces to enrich the museum's collection. As Emily dug deeper into the story, she discovered that the museum had been the site of dark rituals and magical practices during the 1920s. The whispers in the shadows and shadowy presences were the remains of Henry Thornton's attempts to control forces beyond your understanding. Emily realized that the ancient amulet she had used to calm restless spirits was a crucial piece in this story. The amulet was the only thing that could contain the power of Egyptian antiquities and protect the museum from supernatural influences. Determined to solve the mystery once and for all, Emily delved deeper into her research and discovered the location of a royal Egyptian tomb that Henry Thornton had brought to the museum. She believed that the key to completely sealing the museum's dark past was hidden within this tomb. With renewed courage, Emily returned to the museum one last time, determined to face the unknown and forever seal the dark past that haunted the Havenwood Historical Museum. She entered the museum with the amulet in hand, ready to face the restless spirits and the dark presence that lurked in the shadows. As Emily approached the Egyptian tomb, the whispers in the shadows began to increase in intensity, as if the spirits were aware of her presence. She knew she couldn't back down now. With determination, she opened the tomb and began reciting the prayer she had used earlier. The room seemed to shake as Emily spoke the ancient words. The whispers turned into anguished screams, and a bright light filled the space. She felt an invisible force trying to stop her, but Emily continued to recite the prayer with conviction. Finally, when the prayer came to an end, the museum fell into absolute silence. The dark presence disappeared completely, and Emily knew that the past had been sealed forever. The Havenwood Historical Museum was finally free of its old obsessions and rituals. With a sigh of relief, Emily left the museum, knowing that the story of that terrifying night was now part of the past. She had faced the unknown and triumphed over the supernatural forces that haunted her. The museum, once known as the Museum of Horrors, was now a place of history and culture, free.